Welcome to The Spacious Place with Andrea Best, brought to you by CKJ Live. The Spacious Place is where you get to be who you really are. Not what your experiences say, not what your role as a wife or a mom says, not even what your job title says or doesn't say. You get to be who you were fearfully and wonderfully created to be. Join me as we explore the woman inside, the one who longs to be set free. Let's talk with women who journeyed and found themselves surrounded by endless amounts of opportunity. And at this point, they're unstoppable. So if you're ready to be you, truly you, make room, grab a pillow, and welcome to The Spacious Place with Andrea Best.
Hey. Welcome, ladies. Welcome if this is your first time. Welcome if this is not. Welcome back. I am excited for what we have today. So I'm just going to jump right in. In the past few years, I've been kind of discovering who I am, wanting to become this woman who lived in her spacious place, But sometimes I found myself kind of just naturally downplaying my gifts or talking myself out of doing things or even saying things. So maybe I, had an encouraging word with someone, but, just thinking that I wasn't qualified or knowledgeable enough to give it. I know I couldn't live in this place in my mind anymore if I wanted to grow. But honestly, thoughts like that had always been a part of me. So I wanted to identify why it was so easy for me to devalue what I knew I had inside of me and what I was capable of, Now, I have a special guest that I'm thrilled to introduce, but I want to share a quick story before I do, because there was a moment that I had to, honestly, it forced me to see the way I was thinking about myself, and it forced me into wanting to challenge this behavior of thinking. I had a prayer meeting at my house with two other friends, and we were all praying and, kind of taking turns crying out to God about things that we felt we needed him to step in for. And while I was praying, I was asking God to remove the fear from within me, to heal me, all these things I thought I needed. And almost immediately, one of my friends stepped in, she grabbed my hand and she stood me up. And I don't remember her exact words, but it was something to the effect of, God says that that's no longer your story and you have to believe him. The other friend stepped in and I actually remember what she said. She was like, what was once your ceiling is now your floor. And what once hindered you, you're now trampling over. My God. I was so used to praying from a place of pain. And from the outside, they could see who I was and who God was stretching me to be, but I couldn't see it. So today, we're going to be talking about combating negative self-talk and challenging those habits and perspectives. So now let me introduce my beautiful guest. She is a self-love and transformation expert, coach, and speaker that helps faith-based women go from feeling insecure to unstoppable, so to create the lives they truly desire. Having overcome emotional traumas relating to domestic abuse, alcoholism, and depression, she is a testament to when you renew your mind, you transform your life. Her desire to support women on their self-love journey is deeply rooted in her own experiences with learning emotional intelligence and thought management. She knows that women and girls who learn to love themselves well are infinitely powerful, ready to live on purpose with purpose. In 2015, she earned her Master of Communication and Training and established Luve Consulting, LLC in 2018. She is devoted to becoming her best self daily, so to show up as the best wife and mother she can to her amazing husband and two beautiful daughters. She believes that healed women heal families, and healed families heal communities. Through dynamic keynote experiences, masterclasses, and panel discussions, her compelling yet lighthearted delivery and transparent storytelling leaves her audience enlightened and equipped with the tools they need to renew, rethink, transform. Ladies, I'd like to welcome Kristie Lacy to The Spacious Place. Welcome, Kristie.
Thank you, Andrea, so much for having me. I could not be more excited.
Of course. I am so honored to have you on the show. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Oh my goodness, me too.
Yes. So Okay, so we're going to be talking about combating negative self-talk. I want to know, because I know you're really passionate about this topic, why are you so passionate about this, this topic of self-love and learning how to combat things like this?
Well, truthfully, it's because it's my story.
Yeah.
I struggled for many, many years with depression and feeling unloved and misunderstood. And I struggled with self-hate a lot because of, um, I recognized at some point it had a lot to do with what I was telling myself about my circumstances. And
Mm.
so there was one point in my life, and when I was young, even into adulthood, actually, I had some very serious challenges with depression and um, actually suicide attempts. And so as a result of that, I struggled again, like I said. Um, Feeling understood, right? Looking for love in all the wrong places and trying to
Mm.
understand why, why didn't I feel loved? Why didn't I feel supported? And it was really interesting. I was very well known. I was a straight A student. I was super athletic, involved in all sorts of things. But, I think I was very troubled by my home life. And
Mm.
although I believe to some degree I was fortunate, right? I don't want to discount the work that my parents did. They're wonderful human beings, right? Their intentions were
Mm.
good, but I think, we all have our own trials and our own issues. And so growing up kind of in a dysfunctional environment where there was alcohol abuse and verbal abuse and different things that were unhealthy, negative self-talk was normal in my
Right.
space. And so I didn't realize how much it affected me because, and it really, I was baffled because I'm like, I really had this weird I had a level of self confidence, which was, man, I'm pretty awesome. I'm great at everything that I do. But then at the same time, I hate myself. And
Right.
so
Right.
it was really, God and my relationship with him that kind of, him was my saving grace. And, I didn't grow up in church or anything like that, but it's just always been, the Holy Spirit's always been with me. And at one point I was asking God, why is this happening to me? Why is this my
Mm.
life? And I heard very clearly, life is not happening to you. It's happening for you. And you don't have to take
Mm.
it personal anymore. It's not about,
Wow.
this is not happening because you're not worthy. This is not happening because I'd say like, oh, why couldn't I have different parents, or why
Right.
couldn't we have more
Right.
money, or, those things. And so it's like, no, 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 no. This is happening because it's going to grow you in some sort of way for you to be a blessing, for you to be used for my glory. So then at that point, it took a while, right? Because all of the habits that I had learned, and boy, have I made some crazy choices in life.
Right. Right.
but, but, but I got the revelation at a young enough age that although I may not have always found myself in the best situations, that was always in the back of my mind that, it would get better. And then
Yeah.
and since then I've been doing this work of trying to figure out, why do I think this way when the evidence is I am supported, I am loved.
Right. And that makes me think of when you said it seemed normal, like that was the normal thing. It's like it becomes a habit that you don't even realize you're doing sometimes. I can remember, like I was saying, in the story that I shared earlier, it just kind of seemed like that was what I always did, kind of just downplayed my gifts, or kind of just downplayed, the things that I knew that I was good at, but didn't really want to, maybe because of fear, I'm not sure, but so many challenges come with when that becomes our normalcy, when that becomes our immediate response to negatively self-talk. Like, what challenges do we actually face when we start to fight against that?
Well, and you made a really good point, and it's like kind of back to what I was saying earlier. Oftentimes our self-talk is taught, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're used to speaking a certain way about ourselves, it's going to be, these are two common challenges that I see, right? With women that I coach, especially, is the one thing is separating yourself from anything or any person that's not serving you well. Right.
Mm.
And it may not, and by anything, I mean, it could be music. there's certain music that we listen
Yes.
to that can drive us down
So
a
good.
rabbit hole. Yeah, and I love music. I love all types of music, but we have to be
Yeah.
very intentional about what we're letting into our eye gates and our ear gates, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
anything that's not serving you well, or any person that's not serving you well in terms of your intentions for changing the way that you think and talk about yourself, those things are going to have to be removed. And I think that
Yeah.
that's one of the challenges that we face, because again, when we're used to dysfunction, or we're used to, and sometimes we're comfortable, in a space that isn't healthy for us, because it's what we're what we're used to, right? It's easier
Right.
because it's just what we already know, and we have that familiarity with it. And so that can be a challenge for a lot of women, is, being able to separate yourself, because, you don't want to feel isolated. You don't want to feel alone, but truly you aren't, especially in the process of liberating yourself from these, poor thinking habits. There's beauty in that. And so, and then of course, I
Mm-hmm.
believe, with God, you're never alone. So, I think it's beautiful when you take the time to say, you know what, I want something different for myself, and I'm
Yeah.
going to do what's necessary to achieve that. So that's one of the things. And then the other challenge that I really think that is common is learning to unlearn. It's that recognizing those that dysfunction word, recognizing those patterns, right, or those behaviors or those thoughts that are not good for you, and then being able to not just remove yourself but unlearn it, right? And um, being able to like face it, right? If we had issues in our environment, or we have poor habits or behaviors or thinking, we have to be able to face those things, acknowledge them for what they are, and then intentionally heal from that. Because again, there's tons of different practices, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, things that you can do to improve these areas. But ultimately, I believe we always have to get to the root of the problem. And so we can train our minds to think differently, but that won't necessarily heal you, right? It can improve your perspective. It can change the way that you handle situations moving forward. But I believe in order to fully live and walk out purpose, you have to address that area that needs to be healed. And I think that that's a common challenge as well.
And at this point, Kristie, when you're learning to unlearn and you have to separate yourself from the things that you may be used to, you kind of have to get to this point where you're getting down to who you are. Like, what's my identity? And I think that these two are coupled together, negative self-talk and learning who you are. Like, how do you speak to both of these topics in the same sentence?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely go hand in hand, and it plays back into what we were talking about early, and even with my own story. But this is for everybody, right? We're kind of products of our environment. So identity is
Mm-hmm.
knowing who you are, and then for me, also knowing whose you are, right?
Right.
And then what self talk is, it's what you're saying to yourself about all that you believe about your circumstances and about yourself. That being said, let's say, for example, I was raised being told I'm a winner. Then,
Mm-hmm.
as a result of that, I'm going to think like a winner. I'm going to perform like a winner, because that was what was ingrained into my mind. You are a winner. On the contrary, if I'm raised being told I'm a failure, and that is how I identify, my self talk is going to reflect that. I think and I tell myself I am a failure. So when I'm faced with a challenge, that is how I perform. And so your
Mm-hmm.
identity is very much attached to the things that you're saying to yourself. In our youth, we have less control, right, over how we identify, because we don't get to control our environment. We didn't even ask to
Right.
be here, right? Our kids don't ask to
Right.
be here. So we don't get to control the space that we're in. The challenge, though, is working with women in their adulthood who say, well, this is, they don't recognize that their identity is still tied to who, their childhood, or who was ever in their childhood told them they were. And what I realize, and what I think is so important, is that we know that we have the power to, change what we identify with, right? We
Mm-hmm.
have the power to change that narrative about ourselves so that we can improve that area of our life.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. And I think about the the day and age that we live in. I know that's kind of like an old school thing to say this day and age, but the society that we're in now, I feel like we're just bombarded with so many things. You have social media and even as far as like you were saying earlier, music and TV and, because we have access to so much, it seems like we're getting low key, like fed all of this negativity. How do we turn down the noise when it kind of seems like we're bombarded with all of these things that tell us we're this or not this?
Sure. I think that's a really good question. And the reality is you kind of answered it yourself. Turn down the noise. I believe we literally have to do that. Like literally limit the amount of social media. I mean, all media, right? Because especially with the time that we're in, there's so many experts. There's so many people who have, their own opinions about everything that's going on from, all areas of life, right? And so it's very important that we limit the amount of time that we, spend in these spaces or that we allow them into our spaces. And I believe it's fasting sometimes is even necessary. I think it's great. I appreciate social media for everything great that it can be and news and all of that. It's great to be aware, to remain aware and on top of things. But I believe that it can be too much. Information overload is real. And comparison is the thief of all joy. I'll never, I think it's cliche and people say it a lot, but it's true. It's the truth.
Yes.
And so we get into these spaces and again, with so many different opinions and so many new standards. And one day you're supposed to, look this way. And one day this is supposed to be acceptable. And it's like, this is too much. I would love to just show up as who I am without anybody's standards or justifications for anything.
Exactly.
And I just want to be. And so turn down the noise. I'd say do that literally. Turn it off. And another thing that I say is that it's really important to schedule quiet time so that you can literally hear yourself thinking. Allow yourself the space. I used to be one of those people because I struggled so much with self-talk and I had this fear of being alone and I struggled with rejection for so many years that being by myself made me extremely uncomfortable. And, I think that I've learned to appreciate it so much more. I mean, I'm definitely the extrovert's extrovert. I love people. I love communicating. I can talk all day long. But even as I became a coach, and the more I mentor girls and all the things that I do, the more I pour out, the more I realize I need to fill my own cup. So, otherwise, if I'm not replenishing, I'm not going to be able to pour. And so silence offers me that space to just, rejuvenate myself. And I believe in creating space. That's another thing. My office is my sanctuary. I love being here. I have candles. It smells good. It's, I have my prayer closet in here. This is my spot. Okay. So I think it's important that we add flowers and, beautify our space and things like that. So these are the ways that we stop listening and stop looking at everything that's external. And then we find that space, for ourselves to be quiet and to create peace and pray and meditate,
Yeah, I think that's so important what you said. You really have to find the peace. You have to be intentional about it. I remember when I started to kind of just put my phone away like an hour before I go to bed, just so I can just stop consuming before I go to sleep. It really affects, me having peaceful sleep when I don't have the TV on, when I'm not, scrolling an hour before I go to sleep. It just allows my mind to focus, and not be constantly consuming. And then I go to sleep and then I wake up and I'm consuming more. It's just, I have to be intentional. And I think that's honestly where it starts, being intentional about what you're taking in and what you're allowing your mind to focus on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, especially with the bedtime routine and the morning routine. You don't want the last thing to be that you're consuming to be media. And you definitely don't want it to be the first thing when you wake up in the morning, because
Right.
that's just as dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
It's very important that, we're not beginning to consume the moment we wake up, because it's just, again, it creates that overload. And I used to do it myself. And so I can totally relate. And there's a huge difference when I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking at my phone after seeing so much stuff and everybody doing great and wonderful in life. And then some of it is really sad and morbid. Some days I don't even want to get out of bed after I've
Right.
opened up all these emails and I've scrolled through social media. It's like, how can I compete with this? Like, forget it. Let me
Right.
just, let me just lay it back down for today. And then,
Yes.
but now that's not my practice anymore. And the first thing I do is I open my eyes and I say what I'm grateful for. And, I thank God for waking me up, my family up, and for his intention. And I set my intention for today. I wait at least an hour before I'm jumping on my phone. Now, I think there are
Mm-hmm.
certain circumstances, where that's not always the case, but I think it's definitely not the first thing I do on all of, as a regular practice. And so it's really changed the way that I'm able to approach my day and show up in a healthy way.
Yeah. I know that you have Self-Talk Tuesdays. I am an avid follower of you on Instagram. And
Thank
so,
you.
and so I know on the Self-Talk Tuesdays, you usually do affirmations. And I know that they can be such an effective tool. Can you speak more about just daily affirmations being this tool to helping you improve your thought patterns?
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a total advocate. As like you said, I have Self-Talk Tuesday, because what we tell ourselves, you know, repeatedly, right, it is or will eventually become the truth. That's the reality of
Mm-hmm.
it, because we train our minds to believe things, right? And so affirmations are so powerful, because if I'm thinking one way that's not so helpful to my life, or that's not serving me well, I can replace it with an affirmation. And it can, and as long as I'm saying it repeatedly, right, I'm saying it even if I don't believe it, right? Because sometimes we say
Mm-hmm.
affirmations, it's like, I don't believe what I'm saying, so what's the point? I know people who say
Yeah.
that. And it's the repetition for our minds, right? The more we say something, the more it becomes a belief, right? And
Yeah.
so that's why it's important to affirm yourself on a daily basis, and it's definitely something that's necessary. So we actually think about 60,000 thoughts per day, consciously and
Mm-hmm.
subconsciously. And oftentimes it's those subconscious, or, thoughts that we aren't paying enough attention to, which is why I said we have to make the time to be quiet so we can hear what we're
Mm-hmm.
saying to ourselves and really listen, so we can, take note of that. And so that's why we have to be intentional, because once you begin to take note of those, those things that are nagging, those nagging thoughts that we are not necessarily recognizing all the time, then that's when it's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, okay, great. Now I've identified this place. I know what's bothering me. And so if, for example, I was thinking, you know, I'm not enough. And this is actually one of the tools that I want to share, but it kind of goes straight into that. But, if you think, for example, like, I'm not enough, then, and you recognize you're saying that on a regular basis, then you replace that with something like, I'm more precious than rubies, right? And rubies are extremely valuable. So of course I'm enough, right? And so
Yeah.
it's that's why it's so necessary, because we can train ourselves how to think differently with affirmations.
Wow. Yeah. And that is so powerful. I mean, I can even think of, something minor like reading a children's book to my kids. And there's a book that, I absolutely love. It's called I Am Enough. But just to hear like the enthusiasm that when they say I am enough at the end of that book, and the way that they repeat it, and they're walking around the house saying it, it's like, it starts with something so small with me,
Hmm.
just reading the book to them. And now they're kind of professing, I am enough. And they're speaking that, out. And I think that's so powerful. And I'm so glad that you said that when we, even when you don't believe it, even if, don't get discouraged by the fact that you don't believe it right now, just continue to speak that. I love that. Love that.
Absolutely.
Now, I know
Absolutely.
you talked about you being in a place where you had to change your perspective, you had to change your own thought patterns. Where did you begin? Where did that even start for you to decide that you wanted to change, and then how did you start changing?
Whew, okay, well, let me try not to get, I'm going to do my best not to get emotional here.
Yes. Girl,
so
this is a spacious place. Get emotional.
right. Okay. But for me, where it really started was, so again, because I struggled with self-love for so many years, right? I ended up in, some relationships that, let's just say, weren't very healthy, right? Looking externally for love and validation, we end up usually attracting what we are, right? And so if I'm broken, I'm attracting a broken person. And so, I ended up getting pregnant when I was a sophomore in college, and it was devastating to me. I had my whole life figured out, and I was a straight A student. I had scholarship, and I had so much promise. But again, I was in this unhealthy relationship, right? And not because either of us were bad people, but because we truly just didn't know any better, right? We didn't know how to love each other, and of course, because we didn't even know how to love ourselves at the time.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
we made some choices that weren't great. And so, I knew before I ever found out that I was having a daughter that I was. And it was just God told me. I just felt, it was just like I felt it. And it was then that something like this fire burned on the inside of me, like, this is it. Like, you can't do life this way anymore. You can't be like this anymore. You can't think like this anymore, because she needs you to heal, And so it was me having my first child and recognizing at a young age. Now, granted, it took a while to fully get myself out of that situation. And girl, that's a whole long story for another day. We'll have to talk some more about the history. But, again, I recognized it in that moment. And that's kind of what started the journey, was being pregnant with my first daughter. And
wow.
yeah, so I mean, it was a challenge. Don't get me wrong. I was 20 when I 21, and it was just, again, life was just starting for me. And so, but like I said, I knew that it was bigger than me, and that's also what drives what I do, because I believe that heal women, heal families, and heal families, heal communities, right? And so it started with me, and I knew that if I didn't want my daughter to struggle with what I struggle with, I was going to have to heal from it so that I can teach her something different. And so, as far as shifting perspective, I mean, it's a practice. It's really a practice. And so, what I believe is practice makes better, because, we're all works in progress, and we never really arrive at that place of perfection, right? So, I think really where it starts is, beginning to, in everyday life, right? Not when you're struggling with something, but in everyday life, you can start looking at things from different angles. Like, for one, I love photography. I love art. And so, I love being able to look at something one way, and then if you turn slightly to the left, you get to see something entirely different. And there's so much beauty in that for me. And so that practice is sort of like, and even like if you have kids, I love playing like I Spy, right? Because you're looking for something that others can't see, right? You're looking for something that you at one point couldn't see before. And so what is that doing? That's teaching you another perspective. It's teaching you to look for another perspective. And so those are the small things that you can begin to do just as practices on a day-to-day basis that'll allow you to build up this habit of seeing things different. There's another thing, that a tool that I was recently introduced to, actually. So someone that mentors me from afar is Jim Quick. And so I was taking one of his online classes, and I was introduced to something called the 6 Thinking Hats by Edward de Bono. And these 6 thinking hats, there's like 6 different color hats essentially, and each color represents something different. So let's say you have a problem. When you're faced with the problem, you put on a different hat to address it, right? So for example, let's just say the red hat represents emotions. Okay, so then when you put on the red hat, it's, what am I thinking? How do I feel about this? What are my emotions telling me? What is that gut instinct telling me on how I should approach this problem? And then, the white hat might be, you think of like a a science lab coat or something like that, or a doctor's coat, and you think, okay, I'm going to think about all the facts. What are all the facts in this scenario? I just want to look at the data, and that's all I'm going to consider here. And then, for example, the green hat is the hat for creation or something. So you put on the green hat and it says, okay, how can I be creative in my approach to this problem? So whereas we're used to addressing something from our routine perspective, something like the Six Thinking Hats teaches you literally how to, look at things from a different lens. And so beginning to shift your perspective can start with just doing, different sorts of activities that get you used to looking at things from a different lens. That way, so when you're faced with something challenging, you've already trained yourself to see things, outside of your usual frame of thought. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. Girl, are you in my therapy sessions? Because I swear I'm working on this right now. Okay.
I got you, girl.
So I know that you have clients that you are walking through with this. Can you give me maybe 3 tips or three things that you would tell your clients who want to improve specifically in this area?
Yeah. And I think, I've touched on some of it already, but, self-awareness is essential. Before you can do anything else, you need to learn yourself, right? Because it's self-talk. You need to know as much about yourself as possible. Self-awareness is, a full knowledge and understanding of your own feelings. What are your motives? What are your true desires, and what's causing these behaviors that you have? So building self-awareness is essential for this process. And I think one of the things is, like we talked about earlier, spending time getting to know yourself, scheduling that time. Literally, I am a planner freak. I love to plan. And, I'm all for spontaneity, when it's cute and sexy and all the things. But in reality, on my day-to-day routine, okay, is king.
Yes.
Okay, it's the thing for me. Yeah, and so because we all need that, actually, because we're habitual creatures in general, and so we want to make sure we're creating routine. Our children need routine, right? It's important because it helps us to get used to doing something, because again, we are habitual. So we want to make sure that things that we're doing consistently are healthy for our lives. So being intentional about literally scheduling out a time. My time, 5 a.m. I have to get up at 5 because everybody else starts creeping in and waking up at 6, and I need them to be quiet so I can have my quiet time, because everyone else is going to be like, mommy, wife, and then there's no room for Kristie, right? There's no time for Kristie. So the first thing is spend time getting to know yourself, and be intentional about scheduling that time to actually think about what you are thinking about. I'll say that again. Think about what you are thinking about. Journaling is so important, especially in that regard, because we want to be, or must be, intentional about paying attention to our thoughts. So that's the first thing. But the second thing I'd say is, recognizing that it's important to practice that thought replacement. And we were kind of talking about this earlier. So as you spend that time with yourself and you begin to notice those thoughts, the second thing is to begin to write them down. So thought replacement is a practice that I encourage often, all the time, actually, with all of my clients, because again, because we think 60,000 thoughts a day and so much of it is subconscious, we have to make sure. Oh, and I didn't make the point that 95% of the thoughts that we think each day are the same as the day before.
Wow.
So what is that saying? We're repeating our same things. Our 95% of our thoughts are the same every day. So the power in replacing those thoughts is huge, right? Because our thoughts shape our life. And so practicing thought replacement looks like this. For example, if you have a sheet of paper or journal, wherever you keep your notes, and you begin to take these notes and you notice these thoughts you have on one side: I'm not enough, or I'm a failure, or I'm ugly, I'm fat, or I'm too skinny, something like that. Instead of I am not enough, because these are all the lies we tell ourselves. And these are all the unhealthy nagging thoughts. Someone else either said it to us before, we were rejected by somebody else, and we created this narrative, right, for ourselves. And so, these are the things we're struggling with. On the other side of the paper, across from the negative thought, you replace it with a new one. So we kind of mentioned one earlier with like, I am not enough. Instead of that, you can say something like, I am more precious than rubies, or I am more than enough, right? And then another, if you're saying I'm a failure, you can replace that with I am victorious, right?
Yeah.
And for when you're saying those things like, oh, I'm ugly, or I'm fat, or I'm too skinny, right? Because my booty too small, all the things, right? Because we're trying to keep up with the Joneses, right? Rather than that, you say something like, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And so now you're generating these lists, right? And one is all the negative thoughts, and then you create these new positive thoughts. And if you don't know some, Google some affirmations. I mean, you'll find some. And I always go to the Word of God. For me, that's where I go. I like to affirm myself in the Word. And so, being able to use those as your affirmations. And then what'll happen is you're recognizing what your thought is. And now that you know what the negative thought is, anytime you think it, oh, I already have something to replace that thing. So you know what I mean? And so you'll already have something. It's like, when you go on a diet or a new meal plan or something like that, they say meal prep so that you don't feel, led to go and grab a quick snack. You want to already have your food prepared so that it's easy when you're hungry. In this situation, this is you taking the action to be prepared. So when that thought comes up, you already have something to replace it. So you can say, oh, no, that's a lie, but here's the truth about me.
Yes, that's so good.
So I love that one. It's super powerful. It's a great practice. So that's the second thing. And the last thing I'd probably say, it's really important that we remember always, always, always that what we feel is not always what's real. Andrea, this is huge. Feelings are fickle, which means they're temporary, right? They change, they go up and down. And although our feelings are valid, they're not always reality, right? We have the right to feel what we feel, but what we feel might not always be the truth of the matter. It's just what we're thinking at the time. Marty Lefkoe said this quote, and I think it's the best. He said, the only thing you know for sure from an event is that the event happened.
Wow.
I'm like, what? That hit me so hard when I heard that. And I was like, whoa, is that powerful? And so, gosh, we really have to be careful not to assign meaning to stuff, right? We have a tendency to look at a circumstance or look at a situation and be like, for example, if your kid gets a bad grade, the first thing you want to go say is, oh, I'm a terrible mother. Wait a minute.
Yep.
These two things are totally unrelated to each other.
Right.
And so how can you say, now, granted, there could be tons of different factors and maybe you're not perfect, but your child, your son or your daughter getting a bad grade does not automatically equal you're a terrible parent. Or for example, if you get into an argument with your spouse and you guys exchange some terrible words and, once they say, well, once you say something, you can't take it back kind of thing. And then so from that you say, oh, my marriage is ruined. There's no coming back from this.
Yeah.
And so you just told yourself something that's contrary to what's necessary at the time. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Just because you had a terrible argument does not mean your marriage is ruined. And so we have to be very careful that we're not assigning meaning to things, because that right there, that assigning is what can cause us to spiral completely out of control. And again, that's why managing our thoughts is so important, because, again, they shape our life.
Yes. Oh, that's so good. I know I have worked on that specifically that last part, that everything is just not final. Everything is just not, okay, this is what it is. This is what it must be. You have to give yourself room, because it's just not always that. Yeah, that's so good. I'm so glad you said that. I'm taking notes. Okay.
Yes, no, I know it can be a challenge, but this has been great.
Yeah, this has been such a powerful conversation. I am so glad, so glad that you joined me on the show today. I am really, really, really going to take everything you said for myself, but I truly hope that it blesses women to just begin to live in this space that is free from the negative thoughts, is free from, and give them the opportunity to capture those thoughts and to take control of those. I thank you so much for being on the show with me, being in our spacious place. I want you to let the listeners know how they can learn more about Luve Consulting and maybe how they can find you on social media or get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, thank you so much. This has been great. I'll come back anytime. I love these conversations. But yeah, so of course you can check me out on Instagram. That's kind of where I live. You can follow me at Luve, and it's spelled Luve, and it's Love Speaks Life, of course, because we know life and death is in the power of the tongue, and we want to continually use our words to speak life. So that's at Love Speaks Life on Instagram. And one awesome thing is if you check the link in my bio, or if you go to my website, www.kluveconsulting.com, that's kluveconsulting.com, you can download my free workbook, and it's called 6 Steps to Mastering Your Day, The Winner's Guide to Intentional Success. And it's really awesome because it gives you my spread method, and you and something that I created, just ways to really begin to think differently about how you approach your day and how to gain clarity and be intentional about, the way you're approaching life and your goals. So, I'd love for you all to follow me and make sure, you reach out and let me know that you heard about me on the podcast, and so that I can share with Andrea and stuff. So it's been really wonderful, and I look forward to connecting with all of you, actually.
Thank you so much, Kristie. Guys, I am just so full from this conversation. I think being in the spacious place has really challenged me. I hope it's challenging you guys as much as it's challenging me, because I'm really taking these topics, I'm taking the things that we're talking about, and I am trying to dive so deep within myself. So really help other people, help you ladies, and hopefully you can take this information and allow it to be a blessing to somebody else as well. I challenge you guys. I want to challenge you to be intentional. Be intentional about what you're thinking. Take a thought that you're having this week and flip it. Kind of what Kristie was saying. Flip that thought. Have something ready. Thought prep. She talked about meal prepping. I want y'all to thought prep. Prep some thoughts that you can keep on standby. So when that negativity starts to creep in, you can flip it, and you can challenge it, and you can speak life. I want to thank my guest, Kristie Lacy, for being in the spacious place with me. And I cannot wait to see what we have next. But until next time, this has been The Spacious Place with Andrea Best.
You've been listening to The Spacious Place with Andrea Best, brought to you by CKJ Live. Psalm 118:5 says, "When hard pressed, I cried to the Lord. He brought me into a spacious place." Come back and join me as we make more room in our lives to be the women we were created to be. Let's live in the spacious place.